Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today, just like every other YouTuber, we'll be talking about contrast paints. The contrast paints were officially released today and I got my little claws on them and was able to paint up 5 skeletal warriors from the Direct Order 5 skeletal warrior box. Now before we actually get into the nitty gritty, I just want to say I am by no means a professional painter and consider myself quite amateur at best. I do, however, very much enjoy painting, and while I might not be the best, I am improving over the years. After seeing the announcement of the contrast paints, I was naturally quite excited, given the fact that I do enjoy horde armies such as the Skaven, vampire counts and so on, and I saw this as a quick way to obviously build up more units. Especially, as some of you may know, I've been working on some secret armies for the battle report series that we're doing, and that's required a bunch of hordes. So obviously with all the hype revolving around the contrast paints and then seeing GW post about the whole army in a week, I was naturally just extremely excited. Doing as much research as I can, looking into various paint schemes, the types of paints that are being released and so on. And let's be fair, GW really didn't release a lot of information. We had to get that from a lot of other channels such as like Mini War Gaming and so on, which is fine. It's understandable, they're trying to hype it up and keep it as a mystery. It's what they do best, isn't it? That being said, as soon as Dominic, the owner of the local Warhammer shop here, allowed me to buy some paints, I quickly bought as much as I could. Probably even stuff I might not even ever use or in a very situational time, but either way, it's always good to have, isn't it? The background footage you're seeing for this video is just me painting up these 5 skeletal warriors. They've already been pre-based and built up and glued because, well, I wanted to get that out of the way. And it's been sped up just a tiny little bit so I can have the footage and me talking in the background. That being said, I have been working with a number of paints and I'm enjoying it, but let's just work on this video first. So I based up the models with one of the new bases, which is Gracia Grey. It's pretty much like a very, very light grey and a white. The skeletons themselves, and you might hear a little bit of fidgeting, it's because I've actually got the bottles right in front of me. The skeletons themselves, the bones and so on, was done with Skeletal Horde. The paint just applies amazingly, it lives true to the whole one fit coat saying. But other than that, the wood and the spear, so the wood from the shield and the spear, was done with Snakebite Leather, giving a nice little grainy look. The metal was actually done with Griff Charger Grey. I wanted something a bit different, very light, show that it's kind of worn and very... It's not the best stuff, but it's pretty much just to make it look like ancient stuff. And honestly, the grey applies very well. And for the eyes, I actually gave them a bit of ephematic blue, just to make them look like they've been, well, reawakened from the dead. You know, it's dark magic. I did try the purple, I think it was Shaiish purple, which might have fit a bit better, but honestly, given the recess and the small area of the eyes, it just really didn't fit. Now, I do apologize for any background noise, such as like a drilling noise and all that. Unfortunately, as I'm recording this, my neighbors have decided to start working on their house for the 50th time this year, and it's only freaking June. But, hey, I'm digressing, let's carry on. I was a little bit apprehensive when coming towards this contrast paint scenario. Honestly, it was a bit weird to me. Yes, I've seen some people post about it, and I've seen them work, but it's mostly been professional painters, and let's face it, they're professionals, so everything they're going to touch is going to look fantastic, and they've probably had time to practice and so on, and hey, it's just how it is. We're not the big boys, we don't get the stuff early. But nonetheless, I dived right in as soon as I could, and I'm going to be very, very clear here, the painting that you see in this video was my first painting with these contrast paints. I didn't get to do anything beforehand, I actually wanted to, but I got distracted, I had to do some family things, and, well, these things happen, so it actually worked out a bit better, because you guys can see how I was doing, and I might not have the best technique regarding these paints. I was doing section by section and moving on to the next model and so on, but we'll discuss that in just a little bit. So my first note is when I started off the skeletons themselves, I wanted to get the bigger sections done first, and I realized that it dried very quickly as I worked from model to model. I think by the time that I was on the 5th model, the first one had dried, so I could actually work from section to section without fearing about touching it, making it, like putting my fingerprint on it or stuff like that. It was a bit weird when getting into it. Obviously, a lot of us are used to thinning our paints and all that, and there were times where I was instinctively trying to go to thin my paint, and then I had to remember myself, obviously it's the whole one thick coat scenario. And yeah, they were right about that. Honestly, painting it looks like it's already been shading itself and so on. The model looks alright. As the more work I put into it, it started looking more and more battle ready. Naturally, some mistakes were made here and there, and I could fix that up as I went along. There is one thing to note though, these contrast paints are not forgiving. So if you do make a mistake, you're going to have to go over it with a base and then paint again. I've noticed that, and I've got that in one of my Skeletal Warriors, which I'm keeping with the mistake just for future reference. But little mistakes like that happen to all types of amateur painters such as myself, so hey, these things happen. Either way, I was moving on. I was seeing the other paints such as the Snakebite Leather, which worked out really well. It was nice and dark, but it looked nice and grainy when it started a bit with the highlighting system. It looked pretty good to fit up. The metal I wasn't too proud of, but we don't really have a metallic colour, which is very understandable as this is very experimental paint for them, so we probably won't have a metallic for a while. But hey, we do with what we can. I wanted it to look a bit worn anyway, so it didn't have to be shiny. It just would have been nice to have early, you know what I mean? However, we carry on. The metal itself worked out quite well. It did have a little bit of an issue with the spears, where the top of the spearhead was so high up, the paint itself would move down, so it might not have gotten the best effect. And I do know that there's people who've had issues with large panes, such as like Warhammer Space Marine Rhino, which has large panes, so it looks like there's a lot of brush marks. But I'm also seeing it with a lot of very tall things. Even though a Skeletal Spearman might not be too tall, the spear is tall and thin, and I did notice a few issues over there. It's obviously nothing a few coats can't really fix, and you're going to have to keep an eye of it so it doesn't come down and just like start moving down and pooling at the bottom and so on, but yeah, it was a little annoying to deal with when I didn't realize, so I had to keep checking. All in all, I think it took me about 30 to 40 minutes to do the 5 Skeletal Warriors. Bear in mind, I was only using one small layer brush, and I know some people suggest larger brushes and so on, but I was just pretty much trying to get used to this system. So I didn't want to just go all in and make a ton of mistakes. Now that I know, I'm feeling a bit more confident, and I can use a bit more bigger brushes and so on, I'll be able to get stuff done much quicker. And in all honesty, I've always wanted to work on a vampire kind of army, which is why I did 5 Skeletal Warriors instead of like 5 Plague Monks or something. So this has given me a bit more confidence to actually work on another horde and not feel so overwhelmed. The paint is easy to grasp and it is easy to apply. It's not so much like working with technicals or working with highlighting and so on. This is a beast of its own nature and should be treated as such. I see the contrast paints as not only a way to welcome new players into the fold, but also for old players and returning players who want to paint up an army quickly, or just want to test out a color scheme with highlight ideas and so on just a single model, then going back to the old paints if they want to be stuck there, or if they just want to stay in the past. Which, yeah, understandable. Some people are going to be using the old format. I've seen some YouTubers who say they're only going to use the old paints. I myself am going to use the old paints for certain things too. But I'm going to start working a lot more with these contrasts. I quite enjoy them, they're making the armies go a lot quicker, and for someone who does battle reports such as myself, and a lot of people who are part of my team, they all see the same thing. This is a way to have your army done in a much quicker pace to actually play the game. Remember, a lot of people seem to forget that Warhammer itself is a game, not only fantasy, but Age of Sigmar, and 40k, and 30k, and all the other games to it. So if you consider yourself a slow painter and so on, this is actually going to make it much quicker for you. And trust me, I consider myself a slow painter. I've been able to do stuff like 93 clan rats in 2 days, but that was really panicked trying to get them out to do a tournament and so on. However, they did look quite good, but they're going to look much better now when I can actually work on them and be more relaxed. That being said, I'll give my final thoughts on contrast paints now, and the video will run for a little bit longer because it's showing me painting the models and so on, with at the end showing the end result, so you can just skip to that if you are more interested in that. So my initial thoughts for the contrast paints is, I, like many others, were skeptical during the announcement. Obviously, it was the whole one thick coat scenario, and has anyone heard from Duncan recently? Is he okay? But the more I heard about the paint, the more I got more excited. I really did like the idea of being able to paint up hordes much more quicker. Seeing the army in a weak post really did get me quite interested in this paint, because I don't really like elite armies. I like working on hordes because I like big, impressive armies. You've seen my Skaven battle reports where I always bring at least 130 models and stuff like that. So it was quite interesting to see this working that way. Obviously, it wasn't just I who was excited about the paint locally, because there was a bit of a queue when it came to the actual release of them. And that was really good to see, because it's nice to see everyone kind of using the same product in a certain sense. I know a lot of local painters like to use Vallejo paints and so on, and I do too, but it's kind of like the case of, if I see someone post something cool on like one of our chats and so on, I'll ask them what did they use, and then they'll come up with some random brand I've never heard before, and it's only achievable by that paint or something like that, or very similar. So then I'm there stuck with, if I want to try this out, I might have to buy this paint and so on. So a lot of people now are using the contrast paint quite locally. One of our private chats themselves are having a lot of people post pictures and so on, and that's really, really cool. I'm actually getting a lot of ideas from people. I've actually seen some stuff I could have done better with my skeletons, and it works out really, really well. The paint itself was weird to see. When I opened it up, I thought it was a glaze at first, and it does look like a glaze in the bottle. I'm shaking one now, and honestly, it's super weird. However, it applies quite well in some cases. In most cases, you'll need to go like quite heavy with the brush, which most of us have been programmed mentally not to do, because obviously back then with the bases, the layers and so on, one thick coat was a bad thing. However, I think it's easier and you'll get used to it as you work with it more and more. The end result was really cool. It didn't take that long. I'm very, very much excited to finish off my vampires. I know I have I think about 150 skeletons to do, so this is going to take a while. However, hey, I'm actually more willing to sit down and paint. I've also been painting some Skaven with the contrast paints lately, which is pretty cool. I'm seeing a bit of a difference. Obviously, they won't look exactly the same as the other ones. However, obviously, since they're different clans and minor clans and so on, it works out aesthetically. But honestly, with everything, I was quite impressed. I see there's a bunch of different things that can be done with this paint, and I'm going to experiment a lot more, see if I can make it with the glaze and so on. But I see good things coming from this, and well done to GW for creating these awesome paints. That being said, we've come to the end of our video, so thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. Once again, my friends, thank you so much. If you're interested to see how I carried on with the painting, I do recommend carrying on watching the video. I, as an amateur, really am not the best painter, but hey, I do it for the love of the hobby and nothing more. And if you want to see the end result of the models, just skip to near the end. I've got the 5 skeletons taken with a picture there. The models are unbased, and pretty much all the paint that was used was just the 4 contrast paints and the 1 base paint. I do have to base them, but I'm just building up some more guys and just getting them all done in bulk. But, once again, thank you so much for watching. I shall see you all again very, very soon.